Those songs, the tunes, I feel like in some respects like a Pavlovian dog, and holidays are almost here. It's like when the pumpkin spice latte shows up at Starbucks, Halloween's almost here. And part of the season, and Cantor Addie does it to me, today, I was telling her, I could feel High Holy Days, because when I hear her voice, it makes it in there. But also a part of the season, especially this season, is that rabbis, they get together and they study and they talk about where we are in the world, about what we're going to speak about at the High Holy Days. And this year, there's not much to talk about this year really going on in the world. But, the one thing you hear is that it is so difficult right now. Do you talk about politics? Do you not talk about politics? And from the pulpit right now, I cannot tell you how many people come up and say, it's enough already. I don't want to hear it. I don't even read the news anymore. And I come in here and I have to hear it. And then the other side says, something, you don't talk about what's going on in the world enough. I can't even believe you all are not saying anything, and I know for the people that are regulars here, that might be sample bias, that the people were not here for the right day. But no matter what you say, you have both sides. I even received an email this week that a person is deciding to resign from the synagogue because we have the Israeli flag up right now. Now, what's interesting is these flags and the American flag, we have had these up for quite a while, but we project things on top of them. So the rabbi's job in a synagogue is that you're right. We should not be talking politics. We're not very good at it. David Brooks is much better than we are. Thomas Friedman is better. Rachel Maddow would give a much better impassioned speech. Brett Stevens would do better than what we're supposed to do. What we are supposed to do is to teach Torah, is to talk about the Torah. Talk about what does our tradition teach us on how to be in the world. Sometimes it's from the past, sometimes it's from the present moment, and we come from this incredibly rich tradition which has laid all this wisdom in front of us. And so when I was thinking about tonight, I decided, let's not talk about politics. We're going to talk about politics, but we're going to talk about our politics. And by our politics, I am talking just the Torah portion. Just what is written this week in Shoftim, because the Parsha is really about us. We're nearing the end of the Torah, and we're starting to really build the structures for how are we supposed to exist in the world. So when we're in Deuteronomy 17, verse 14 to 15, it's written, quote, "If after you've entered the land that your God has assigned to you, and you've taken possession of it and settled in it, and you decide, I'm going to set a king over me, as do all the other nations around me, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by God." Now, on the most basic level, when you read these verses in the Torah, it seems to be a positive commandment that we should go get a king for ourselves, just like all the other nations have. Now, I studied with Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory of what he wrote about this line in the Torah. And one of the things that he points out is that there's actually no other command in the entire Torah that says, something, you should be like the rest of the nations. It doesn't say that. It says the exact opposite to us over and over again. It's the reason why, the brand for Hebrew National? We answer to a higher authority. That was their brand, because that is what we do. We answer to a higher authority. We're not supposed to be like the rest of the nations. But right here, it seems like it says that. But then, of course, the Torah keeps going in the next verse. And we're told listen, you're going to have a king like the other nations, but this king, it must be chosen by God. Now, I do not want to get into a theological discussion right now about God. Is God anthropomorphic or not anthropomorphic? I would very clearly say not anthropomorphic, but we're not going to go there. What we are doing here, and what it seems to be saying on the most basic level, is that the king that you appoint is not actually the highest authority. The king falls underneath something greater, which is God. This is key to the structure that we begin to create in this week's Parsha. Because the king is kind of like the hot dog as well. The king has to answer to a higher authority. Because ultimately, the king, it's not about him. The king is actually here to serve and to do something much bigger than just himself. Because the Torah then continues into the next line, which seems odd because normally when we talk about kings, we think the king is almighty, they can do whatever they want. Not in our Torah, that is not the case. Immediately, the Torah begins to put limits on the king's power. It says, you should have a king. God is above the king. And here are the limitations that we're going to put on the king. A, you cannot have too many horses. It says that. Now, when you look in the commentaries of why can the king not have too many horses, it says that he should have just enough for his chariots. Don't be excessive. If a foreign adversary offers you extra and new forms of transportation, the king must reject it. And specifically, the rabbis think what they're talking about here is Egypt. Because the horses would come from Egypt. They didn't actually exist in Israel at the time. So it says, no, you don't do that. You take just enough. You're not there to get rich, to get more horses. You're here to serve and do something much bigger than yourself. Number 2, you can't have too many wives. Why? There's a fear that you're going to be distracted from your main purpose, which is serving. And remembering that this is a life of service, not a life about yourself. Number 3, you cannot have too much wealth. According to Rashi, the king could only have enough wealth to pay the soldiers. The money and the wealth was never meant for him because he was a servant of something much bigger than him. There's this intrinsic danger which the Torah realizes, and this is our earliest documents we have. This is way before we get to the Talmud, realizing we need to build this kind of structure in order for governments and societies to survive. That there's this intrinsic danger that a king thinks that this position is about him, and him using this position to enrich himself. When the extent of what you're allowed to enrich yourself is actually your people and your soldiers, and all of that is to protect what you're actually serving. And then after all of these limitations that it gives you, it gives one more. It says these teachings right here. It calls it the Mishnah Torah. You must keep this Mishnah Torah right next to you at all times, because you're not doing this to serve your own needs or your own wants. You're doing this because you're an emissary and you're bound to something much bigger. So the question becomes, was a king good for Israel? And as Rabbi Sachs points out, and only the way a rabbi could point out, he says, it's an unequivocal yes and no. Now, there are many bad kings in Israel's history. Now, the problem is also some of those bad kings, they actually did really good things. If we think about David, that Star of David right there on the flag. David, he united a nation. He was a war hero. And David committed one of the biggest sins with another man's wife, Solomon. He built the temple in Jerusalem, the one we have been referencing, the one, except for this synagogue, every other synagogue in the world is facing. I guess we are built after the temple that he built. He wrote the Song of Songs. He wrote Proverbs. And he broke every single rule that the Torah just laid out for us in the Parsha this week. He had too many wives, he had too many horses, and he had too much money. Now, much of the Torah, it's laid out in a way to teach you what not to do. It's not about what you should do, it's about what you shouldn't do. And the examples of failure are all over the Torah. We don't run away from failure. It's not what we do in our tradition. We run straight into it in order to learn. It tells us don't avoid failure. Step into it. If you look at the book of Genesis, it is failure after failure after failure. It shows you that when you have family issues, those issues will be passed from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, and it goes on and on and on. And if you don't fix it, it will continue to go on. If you remember Jacob, remember him? I know this is coming up in a few months when we start the Torah over, so spoiler alert right here. Jacob is taught by his mother to deceive his father. And then Jacob joins a family where his father-in-law deceives him. And then eventually it's Jacob's sons who deceive him, telling him that his son is dead. Because remember, they sold him to slavery. Remember where they sold him in slavery to? Egypt. Guess how we ended up slaves in Egypt? From that family pattern. We are taught in Genesis, don't be like them. Here are the patterns. If you don't fix your family pattern, it's going to continue over and over, and you can't imagine the consequences. The book of Judges does this by showing us what happens in government leadership when your leader makes it about themselves. When the leader profits from the position of power, when they use the position of power for its own sake. When that happens, you can get so obsessed with power for the sake of power that your primary concern becomes not about your people, not about your nation, but rather about your position of power. You may keep wars going on, not because they're serving the nation, but because they are serving you. And when this begins to happen, when it suddenly becomes about you, you begin to ignore the root of what Judaism actually is, which is built upon values and ethics. Ethics even when it comes to war. In Proverbs 25:21, so this is later on, it says, quote, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. It's a really hard mandate, and it's written inside of our texts. Even in conflict, we're told to respond to human needs of our enemy. Our tradition, it calls for radical empathy and humanity. Our halacha, our Jewish law, it even addresses by Maimonides in his Mishnah Torah. He says, when laying siege to a city to capture it, we do not surround it on all four sides, but only on three, allowing an escape path for anyone who wishes to save his life. That's Hilchot Melachim 6:7. What happens when a leader no longer has that Torah sitting next to them, and they start enriching themselves? When they start taking opulent gifts, according to Judges 21:25, and this is the very final line. You want to know the conclusion of Judges? This is the last line of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did as they pleased. Rabbi Sachs, he calls this, it was a moment of anarchy. That last line of Judges tells us that when a leader makes it about themselves, so does everyone else in society and your entire society will collapse. That is what happened to us. Now, the founders of Judaism, they knew this. The founders of America also knew this. Think about it, on the top of your bill, what does it say right there on every single bill? In God we trust. Doesn't say in Constitution we trust. The Constitution and the entire system of what that flag represents is about something much bigger than us. These flags on the bima, they're not about America or Israel as it is. They never were. That's not why we developed them. We developed them as aspirational ideas of what America and what Israel could be. If right now you feel like the nations don't represent our fundamental values found inside the Torah, what we need to do, what we have always done, is that we work to make them closer to what they should be. We don't abandon, we engage. We make change. Your presence here, this matters. Being engaged in the world and saying, actually, I know these systems which we're trying to build and I don't see it, then you go and make it happen. Because Judaism is very, very clear. When you get to the point when leaders make it about themselves and you want to know what's going to happen, just go read the book of Judges. It is sitting right there. Judaism has got something to say and to teach us about how to be in the world. These flags, they're just here to utz us. If they upset you that it's not where it ought to be, good. Then we get to work. That's what the Torah is trying to teach us. All of us are on a mission. And eventually, God willing, we will get to where the world ought to be. Shabbat shalom.